The LinkedIn Podcast Network is sponsored by TIAA. TIAA makes you a retirement promise, a promise of a guaranteed retirement paycheck for life. Learn more at TIAA.org/promises pay off.
LinkedIn presents.
What's going on, listeners? This is the Next Big Idea Daily. I'm your host, Michael Kovnat, and it's Monday. So I hope your work week is off to a good start and it's not too stressful. Stress can be a real killer, as you probably know, a toxin for your physical and mental health. And it's not always the big stressors that are the worst offenders. Rob Cross and Karen Dillon make that point in their book, The Microstress Effect, how little things pile up and create big problems and what to do about it. Rob is a professor of management at Babson College, and Karen is a former editor of the Harvard Business Review. Drawing on their research, Rob and Karen show how the small, everyday issues, if not properly managed, can bloom into huge problems, leading to macro stress and burnout. Here they are to share some of their big ideas.
I'm Rob Cross, a professor at Babson College and co-founder of the Connected Commons, a consortium of around 150 organizations studying how relationships and networks impact our organizations and lives today.
And I'm Karen Dillon, former editor of Harvard Business Review.
A few years ago, while doing research on high performers, we stumbled across something we hadn't expected to find. Because our interview subjects had all been identified by their organizations as exceptionally effective, we were expecting to hear stories of how these people were just at the top of their game. But gradually, usually deep into our interviews, they began to acknowledge that they were struggling to keep up with both work and their personal lives. What we were hearing about was stress, of course, but in a form that neither they nor we had the language to articulate. As they fumbled to describe it, patterns emerged. It was never one big thing that led them to feel overwhelmed. Rather, it was the relentless accumulation of unnoticed small interactions with other people, often in passing moments, that was drastically affecting their well-being. Some even broke down into tears, lamenting that they couldn't see a path out of barely holding it all together. This was stress, but a different kind than most of us are familiar with. We began to call it microstress. But the fact that this is micro doesn't make it insignificant. In fact, microstress takes an enormous toll on all of us in the long run. Why should we care about the impact of tiny moments of stress? Microstress is particularly pernicious because it's baked into our everyday lives at a volume, intensity, and pace we've never experienced. And yet our bodies don't quite know what to make of it. Because they happen so quickly in the course of a routine day, microstresses can fly under the radar of our fight-or-flight vigilance systems, while still taking a significant toll, neuroscientists tell us. While our brains barely register the individual microstresses in the first place, we may not even remember the original source of the microstress. Our bodies know something happened. For example, one study found that if you're exposed to social stress within 2 hours of a meal, your body metabolizes the food in a way that adds 104 calories to that meal. If this happens daily, you'd gain 11 pounds a year. Microstress can increase our blood pressure and our heart rates or trigger hormonal or metabolic changes. So you may be quicker to dismiss microstress than more macro forms of stress because you think you can just manage it in the moment. But when microstresses accrue, one on top of the other, they begin to wear you down. As we could see in our research, the continual battering of microstress that most of us have in our everyday lives can lead even the highest performers to burnout, not just in their work, but in their personal lives as well. If these high performers feel this way, what hope is there for the rest of us?
So where is all this microstress that we hardly notice coming from? Our research has identified 14 specific sources of microstress in 3 broad categories. First, there are microstresses that drain your capacity to get things done. This is why so many of us feel like we're failing both at work and in our personal lives. We can barely get through the responsibilities of our day. Microstresses that drain your capacity are the kind of things that clog your calendar. How many of us have the feeling that we can't even start our own work until the end of the day after we spend our day in meetings or chasing requests from others? This category of microstress might take the form of finding that you're misaligned on roles or priorities with your colleagues on a project at work. For example, you might find that you're part of a cross-functional team where individual team members have very different views of what success will look like. Or you might find yourself having to deal with an unpredictable authority figure, such as your manager, who is constantly shifting what she's asking of you without recognizing the microstress she's causing you. or you may simply be trying to cope with a surge of responsibilities at work or at home. For example, worrying about a child who's struggling in school or an aging parent with everyday life challenges can be the source of layers and layers of microstress for you and your whole family.
Second, there are microstresses that deplete your emotional reserves, the internal well of peace, fortitude, and resilience that helps you focus, prioritize, and manage conflict. Because the people who cause us microstress are typically people we're close to personally and professionally, the microstress we feel during our interactions with them can come layered with emotional complexity. And because these people are part of our daily lives, we can't remove ourselves fully from those interactions that deplete our emotional reserve. This might come, for example, from managing and advocating for people on your team. One common example of microstress in our research was managers who were constantly worrying about ensuring that their direct reports were thriving. Or you might find yourself having to navigate confrontational conversations, not necessarily with a jerk, but with a colleague who's overloaded and simply trying to get her work done too. Or you may find yourself having to figure out how to work with different colleagues because of the way teams are formed and reformed in hectic workplaces because you simply haven't worked with them long enough to build up a well of trust.
And finally, there are microstresses that challenge your identity, triggering the uncomfortable feeling that you're not the person you really want to be. Microstresses that challenge your identity can slowly chip away at your motivation and sense of purpose. For many people, this may come from finding yourself being asked to do work that might conflict with your personal values, such as being part of a very aggressive sales team. Having interactions that undermine your confidence. For example, your role at work may feel impossible to keep up with in ways that make you feel like you're being set up to fail. Or even simply losing day-to-day access to the network of colleagues who supported you at work when you changed jobs. And too often we find ourselves in an echo chamber of trying to live our lives to meet the expectations of other people without recognizing the toll that can take on our sense of who we are. Most of us experience multiple forms of these microstresses in our day-to-day lives, and cumulatively they add up.
So what can we do about the tsunami of microstress in our daily lives? Conventional advice for improving our well-being tends to focus on steeling yourself against stress, such as using mindfulness, meditation, or gratitude. And these are absolutely good things to do to help refresh our minds and bodies. But wouldn't it be better if you were able to remove some of the microstress in your life instead? From decades of social science research, we know that a negative interaction can be up to 5 times more impactful than a positive one. That means finding ways to eliminate even a few microstresses in your life can make a significant difference. Our research suggests that most people can find opportunities to make a notable difference in their microstress level using 3 strategies. First is to push back on microstresses you're experiencing in concrete and practical ways. Small but effective shifts to how we are interacting with others can very quickly counter microstress and have an outsized impact on our daily lives. These range from learning how and when to say no to small tasks, to managing technology and how it notifies and interrupts you, to readjusting relationships to prevent others from putting microstresses on you, to name just a few of the actionable ways the successful people in our research pushed back. The trick in all of this is to manage the interactions and not the relationships. In fact, in contrast to how we conventionally think of stress, many of the greatest sources of microstress in our lives are people we love and care deeply for. For example, my daughter is simultaneously an inspiration and key source of purpose and humor in my life, yet at the exact same time, this little person turns out to be one of my biggest microstressors, as I worry about her well-being, help her with different aspects of her life, or just absorb her stress. One of the things we had fallen into is a pattern of her sending me little notes to vent whenever anything bothered her, large or small. To her, these texts were 10 seconds at a time that then had me worrying about her in the back of my mind for hours. As we discovered this in a comical way, one night we just shifted how she turns to me. She doesn't pass on the knee-jerk reaction microstresses anymore. When she needs me, I'm there in a heartbeat. So the relationship is as strong and critical for both of us as ever. But we've taken out one kind of interaction, which has had a major impact on my life. When you start looking at the interactions themselves, you discover countless opportunities to make shifts that dramatically impact our well-being.
Second, and maybe a little bit surprising, is to be attuned to the microstresses you are causing others. Inevitably, when we poll large audiences on which microstresses are impacting them the most, and then ask which microstress they are causing, we get very similar patterns. In other words, the microstresses we experience, we tend to pass on. Of course, we want to stop this. Nobody wants to be the kind of person who causes other people microstress. But the magic is that this won't just help your colleagues, it will help you too. When we create microstress for others, it inevitably boomerangs back on us in one form or another. Think about how a child might become more petulant if you get overly pushy about keeping up with their homework, or how you might be unintentionally burning out one of your highest performing direct reports because you don't stop to think about what microstress you are causing for them, resulting in stress boomerang back on you as they become less engaged or maybe even leave. Emitting less microstress means you will receive less in return.
The people who were best at managing microstress worked at building multidimensional lives. The final strategy we found in our research involved finding ways to rise above microstress. One reason some microstresses affect us is simply because we let them. You can learn to keep some of them in perspective and let things that used to bother you just roll off your back. This is not just a call to see life through rose-colored glasses. We recognize the toll that microstress can take on all of us. But we found that the happiest people in our research were able to put some of the microstress in their lives in perspective better than the rest of us. In our interviews, the people who were best at coping with microstress made a conscious effort to shape their lives to have more diverse connections with other people. They pursued activities, common interests, and group experience that helped create a rich, multidimensional life to help them inoculate from the effect of microstress. For example, something as simple as meeting a group of friends for a weekly basketball game, or maintaining a group chat to share silly memes that only your closest friends from college will understand, can offer moments of authentic connection that soften the blow of microstresses. We call this finding dimensionality in their lives, and these activities and groups served a very real purpose of helping them also recognize when minutia was truly minutia. For example, we talked to a well-regarded neurosurgeon who found himself reveling in the fact that he'd been able to rekindle his passion for music after he joined a local band that met on the weekends. He now is playing with amateur musicians much younger than he is, but finding that authentic connection with them, not to mention blowing off some steam together, has added a vibrant new dimension to his life.
But adding dimensionality to your life doesn't require big new commitments of time. Many of the people in our research who were able to manage microstress well just found ways to connect with others in small moments. One person, for example, relished working in his yard on the weekends because he was able to connect with his neighbors. Another played in an informal soccer pickup game with other parents and children in a way that allowed him to develop new friendships, spend time with his own children, and improve his physical well-being all at the same time. And still for others, it was simple as maintaining connections with lifelong friends, even if that was just happening on text or other virtual forums. Having a multidimensional life means that our identities aren't overly tied to one activity, such as work. The mere act of connecting with others, having informal conversations, sharing mutual interests, or seeing the world from another perspective is a powerful antidote to the daily toll of microstress. Those connections can also help us build resilience, continue to prioritize our physical health, and find purpose even in small moments. But as we go through life, we're pulled in so many different directions that we tend to let go of the activities and relationships we once enjoyed. This is the effect we all feel right now from COVID. Microstress has gone up by any measure we look at. And at the same time, the social distancing pulled us from the groups and activities that help keep us in perspective. Overall, this research suggests that we need a variety of relationships, not only close friends, to help get us through the reality of living with microstress.
Okay, well, I hope those ideas help immunize you against microstress this week. If things get hard, remember, the Next Big Idea team is always here for you. We have an app, a book club, and a whole lot more. Check out everything we have to offer at nextbigideaclub.com. Tomorrow, I'll be back with athlete-turned-journalist Jacqueline Alness, who will share some big ideas from her book, The Fruit Cure, the story of extreme wellness turned sour. I'm Michael Kovnat. See you tomorrow.